Did the slaves have their right to vote?
Not constitutionally, no. Only the
Yeah, so
white
then
landowners.
so if I don't understand how that's hypocritical then, because my thing is I believe that we had a right to rebel because we were not being given our represent no taxation without representation. And when you talk about the people who were enslaved, they were people who were not allowed to participate in the system of governance. I know it's a controversial issue, but I
All right.
believe black people should be able to vote.
All right. I don't think that most of them should.
What
But
was that?
I said I don't think that most of them should. Guys, I have a guest with me. Is he ready? The great Dylan Burns on Twitter at DylanBurns1776. BURNS. is his first name. A Democrat political consultant, environmental city board member, board of directors at Free State, Twitch guy, DylanBurnsTV on Twitch, by the way. I have appeared on his Twitch a few times. Talking foreign policy and politics and hosting the Hippy Dippy round table debates, on which I've appeared a couple of times, 47 and 50. Mover and shaker at Maryland, out of Maryland, and recent guest on The Fallen State with Jesse Lee Peterson, also Dylan Burns TV on YouTube. Please welcome Dylan, who's taller than he appears. Aspiring politician, age 20, and a Christian. Burns! Dylan, thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate you joining me.
Very happy to be here and happy to have that wonderful welcome. How you doing, Hake?
Doing well. Are you a Guns N' Roses fan? You're wearing a Guns N' Roses t-shirt.
Yes, I am. My father was a huge metalhead when I was growing up. He passed down his taste in music to me.
Oh, right on. Right on. That's respectable. I was told that Guns N' Roses was devilish when I was a little kid by my mother, I think. But my friends had Guns N' Roses t-shirts when I was a kid. So.
Did you like Guns N' Roses?
I only was introduced to them after I graduated high school. I was introduced to the internet. And, they had Napster and stuff. And so I heard, "Take Me Down to Paradise City where the grass is green and the girls are pretty," something like that. And there's a catchy song, and there's some other catchy songs. So, yeah, I suppose I like them. I don't know.
Do you think they're devilish?
Not in the way that I was thinking that they were devilish when my mother told me that they were devilish. They may be like, chasing after pleasure and stuff like that. In that sense, it could be considered kind of do what thou wilt type of Satanism, I guess. But I didn't think of them as outright, let's sacrifice human beings to Satan type devilish.
Nah, I'm a huge Frank Zappa fan myself.
Okay.
I have his records. I'm actually trying to get a signed guitar, Frank Zappa's. I'm trying to see if I can get that.
He's passed on, right?
Yeah, he's been passed on for a while now.
I've heard a little bit of his stuff. Kind of weird music, kind of interesting though, creative.
It's very weird music. The thing that's interesting about Frank Zappa is that I felt like a lot of times he was making music mostly for himself, just whatever he liked.
Right.
And he just kind of threw it out. He kind of reminds me of like a Norm Macdonald of music. Have throws out whatever he found enjoyable, and he was able to make a living off of it. So it was a bonus for him.
Okay.
I feel like he could have been a lot more popular, but he was just having too much fun with the comedy music. I feel like if he really just unleashed his like guitar skills for most people, he could have gone so much further. Because I think honestly, he's one of the best guitar players who ever lived.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. There is another host on Jesse Lee Peterson's network whom you may or may not have heard, named Nicholas Gonzalez, and he hosts. It's called Anchor Baby's new show, and he's a guitarist himself. And I encourage you and my viewers to check him out. But I wanted to ask you, before we get started with like the serious stuff, you mentioned America's founding, and your Twitter handle is DylanBurns1776. With all of the revisionist history, if you will, have you ever thought of or gotten pressure to change your Twitter handle to DylanBurns1619?
I have I'm very happy with my Twitter handle. It's actually also the handle of an old email account I have. And I have gotten a few people who have gotten angry at that. I remember there was one person who also got angry at the fact that I have an American flag in my background. And even though I remember I was debating a right winger, and even though the right winger was saying things that they vehemently disagreed with, probably much more than anything I believed, the fact that I had that American flag in the background pissed them off even more than that, because I was supposed to be the lefty and I wasn't supposed to have the American flag. But I'm a very stars and stripes kind of guy. I feel that both parties should be representing the flag.
You know, I appreciate that about when there's a Democrat who is patriotic, it's kind of, and you're a Democrat, I think.
Yep.
It makes me think positively of, especially if it's like, if it comes across as real and it wasn't just in a reaction to Trump and trying to, you know, like, because there's these gotcha people who play like, oh, I'm the real patriot and Trump doesn't have any love for America, which I think Trump is quite consistently been expressed appreciation for America. But there was a guy named Seth Rich who was a Democrat, and he seemed like a patriotic guy. I saw him like, maybe it was a bit too much, but sometimes he was like dressed up in American flag. And there's a communist whom I debated who acts like he's pro-America. And I appreciate that. That guy, Infrared.
I'm debating him this weekend at DebateCon, actually.
Nice.
You were just shouting out.
What are you guys gonna talk about?
Taiwan. I'm a huge supporter of Taiwan, and he does not like Taiwan.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate him and his push in the sense that Infrared is a communist, but he's like a pro-America, if you will, communist, even though he accuses us of slavery as being one of the worst things, and he thinks that we genocided the Indians and stuff. Mm-hmm. But he's still like, oh, America has a lot of positive things. You don't need to get rid of America like the Antifa communists seem to want to do. So that's nice. Did you want to follow up on that?
I feel like it's strange for me because I feel that patriotism is not as simple as like just, oh, you have the stars and stripes.
Right.
I feel like it's kind of fake to be like, I'm super patriotic, but then I also stand against everything that America is supposedly supposed to represent, even in an idealistic sense. Like, let's say that I said I'm a huge like patriot, but let's burn the Constitution. Let's get rid of free speech. Let's get rid of the. Then are you really a patriot, or are you just a patriot in like word only? And there's a difference. I also would say, because obviously there's like debate about like the Constitution and the specifics and what is and isn't like the best interpretation of that or what's best for the country. But I feel that when it comes to someone like Infrared, that it's a type of fake patriotism, because it's very strange to hear someone say I'm a patriot and then espouse values that stands against like civil liberties and stuff like that. It's very strange to me. He's somebody who's questioned like even like concepts like freedom before and its inherent value, even though that's something that our nation stands on principle.
You know, when I talked with him on Modern Day Debate, because we were debating communism on trial was the thing, we didn't really get into specifics. He spoke in generalities it made him sound like I couldn't tell that Trump would disagree with anything that he said, or that he would disagree with Trump. So you may know more about his values, if you will, than I do. Interesting. So you interviewed me. You hosted me on the Hippy Dippy roundtable with several others. The first time in 47, Hippy Dippy roundtable 47. We talked about Kyle Rittenhouse, the death penalty, wokeness, and then in 50 we talked about January 6th, 1 year later, which you attended, and I want to hear about that. Biden's first year, Marjorie Taylor Greene's Twitter ban. Did you have any like impressions about that you would want to voice to us?
I would say that every single time you come on, you leave an impression with both viewers and guests, and I'll get messaged afterwards about you being on there, which I think is, of course, great for you to be able to leave an impression, because a lot of people's like, who's that guy? I don't remember. But people remember you because you come on and you do make a splash. Obviously, I disagree with the vast majority of what you said. I think that should probably be apparent since we're just on completely different ends of the political spectrum. But I would say that one thing that I appreciate is how blunt you are and how honest you are. Because I feel like a lot of times when I have somebody on my show who's right leaning, they kind of beat around the bush, so to speak, or they'll say everything but saying the thing that you could tell is on the tip of their tongue because they're scared that it might like hit somebody the wrong way.
Yeah.
But you never have that feeling. The only time you won't do that is if you're concerned about somebody's channel. And
Right.
that's also something I appreciate, the concern for other people's livelihoods on the show. And so, yeah, I would say that I appreciate your bluntness. I remember JLP asked me during his interview of me, and I said, I appreciate how honest you were.
Nice. Right on, man. And I appreciate you having me on your show. It's cool. And I really enjoy talking with all those people, including the ones that I have banters with.
Of course.
You said, and I want to clear some of the things up because you appeared on The Fallen State and it got people riled a little. You said you discriminate against stupid people.
Yes.
Does that include millennials?
Of course, of course. The thing is, of course, like you can tell in the interview that it goes from very serious to very jokey at times, and of course, I feel that that was one of those moments that some people got was just me, just like jabbing at the older generations, just hey, grandpa, shaking my fist at them, and other people took it a little bit more serious than that, like. It was an actual like the millennials, they need to be taken down. I just like to poke fun at the millennials because they're terribly unfunny. They're terribly unfunny, and they have terrible taste in media.
And somebody else, a couple of people also took it seriously when you said, I guess you said it went over my head, but that you discriminate against people with low subscriber counts, like you won't bring them on your show or whatever, which
Of course.
I know not to be true. But they just took it seriously, like you really do that.
Look, I'm a greedy capitalist, right? I'm the hypocrite Democrat, the liberal elitist. When I see a chance to make money but espouse communism, of course I'll take the opportunity. I hate hardworking Americans and will bring about the caliphate and will scam my way to do it. But I'll say that, and most people realize Dylan's obviously joking. But some people, I think they have a perception of left-wingers or Democrats in their minds, and sometimes you'll say something that they're thinking, and they'll just I like to play into people's misconceptions because I find it fun. But some people, of course, want to take it too seriously. I think some people just need to chill out.
You attended January 6th, I call it the mostly peaceful Capitol protest in Washington, D.C. in 2021. Did you watch Trump's speech that day? And what all did you see?
I did not attend Trump's speech. I got there a little later on Trump's speech. I was mostly wandering around for a good amount of it. And then I started going towards the Capitol once I started hearing reports that something was going down there. I heard that like there's people storming or something like along the lines on the ground. Like there's people storming the Capitol. I was like, what? And I went over there. I didn't really believe it because you would think, it's during this process there would be more security. Like the idea that someone could storm the Capitol building while basically the most powerful people in the country are all in there was like a ridiculous thought. But then I got closer and it seemed to be the case that people actually were storming the building. And it was wild seeing that happen from a distance. I got to stream a certain amount of it, but then eventually my phone died, and I got closer and documented it from a closer spot. There's one of the incidents that happened that I think was widely reported. There's a scene I think there was some pictures of where there's a bunch of camera equipment from local like news reporters smashed on the ground, and like some of it was like damaged, and it was like reported by a lot of people, of course.
Yeah.
I actually saw the incident happen. I was actually right there when it happened. And the incident, I haven't seen a lot of people cover it. What happened was there was a bunch of reporters covering the violence on the Capitol. And one of them calls it a riot. And that pissed somebody off, right? Because they were like, well, no, this is a peaceful protest. And so what they did is they took their American flag and they started waving it in front of the camera. And then more people gathered and there was like more yelling. And then someone threw a water bottle and then one water bottle turned into like 3 water bottles, and then they started pushing down the gate that divided them from the media, and eventually they pushed back the media and smashed the cameras. And I was able to document some of that with my phone, but that was like a wild moment seeing firsthand. It was I still, it's still something that I haven't fully processed from being there, because it's such a, it seems like an historical event when people talk about it. But while I was there, I didn't, I guess I didn't realize exactly how much this day would be talked about as a day of historical significance moving forward.
Right. Do you have any guess or guesstimate how many people were there?
See, I'm really bad with like guessing the amount of people that were there, but I can tell you it was a crowd. I saw like I don't know, maybe like 50,000 to like 80,000. I have no clue,
Okay.
because I only got to see one part of like the city, of course, at one part of the event. I wasn't there at Trump's speech.
Right.
I got there a little late because I slept in, because I'm a 20-year-old college student. And so I would say, but there was a lot of people there. There was certainly a ton of people there, more than the Million MAGA March, and I was there for that too.
Have you been to many like packed situations over at the around the Capitol?
Not really. The two that I went to that were I've been to 3 things. It was the Million MAGA March, January 6th, and then the inauguration on the 20th. The first 2, there was like a lot of people, and I saw violence on the first 2 events, the Million MAGA March and the Capitol riots. The third one, on the inauguration, like the city was dead. It was so weird seeing like troops just marching around everyone's gates.
Oh yeah.
The whole city was. I couldn't even like get around the city.
What a pain.
It was so weird, because for me, I was born and raised in the DMV, and so seeing like checkpoints like at every like few blocks was so weird, because like a few weeks before I could have gotten a hot dog at the same place.
Yeah, they turned it into from being like too little security to like going overboard with the security after the fact. Too late. What a
Yeah,
shame.
it's a lot of locals in the area really resent those particularly who were violent on the day,
Right.
because they're angry that now um, a bunch of people who don't live in the area, came into the area, got violent, then they all get to go home. And now we're the ones who have to deal with checkpoints. We're the ones that have all these gated stuff now. We're the ones who no longer have access to these beautiful parts of the city we
Right.
used to have access to. And so a lot of people in DC, which is an overwhelmingly democratic city,
Yeah.
have a lot of resentment for what happened that day towards the people who were violent.
That's a good
Uh,
point. It's on top of it, they disagree with these people who were protesting, and some of whom went crazy. So they disagree with them, and they made it life more miserable. Wow.
I remember there was an interaction I had. I did something that was silly, and I'm very lucky I didn't get hurt. I went there in a Biden hoodie on January 6th. So I had this big Biden logo on my back and on my front, and a vote for John Ossoff pin, because I was down in Georgia for that election, and I did my best to help Ossoff win, and thankfully we won. But I was there, and like every few minutes there'd be somebody who sees me and would be just like laugh at me, or like spit at me or something like that.
They spit at you
Um,
too?
yeah, I had some people spit at me. I had a few, like I think like once I had somebody like throw the F slur at me. No one has swung at me. No one hit me, which
Right.
I'm happy about. But there was like a few people who like, you know, voting for that man was a form of treason,
Nice.
and you know what they do to traitors. And I'm just like, I don't think that's how treason works. I don't think it's you voted for a different party. I think there's 2 parties, and you vote for one or the other if you want. I mean, I don't think that's treason.
It's good.
But
It's a good
yeah.
thing you're tall. Like you're bigger than you're bigger in person than you look online. I thought you were like a small little like Asian when on your stream. And you,
A small little Asian, you say?
yeah.
Wow.
Are you part Asian or are you just all white?
Nah, I'm German and Irish. I'm not part Asian at all.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, it's
Nah, am I really that big? I'm only 5'10".
all right. Interesting. I don't know. I just pictured you maybe because the camera is above you right now.
Yeah,
the camera's above
that's
you.
what it is.
Yeah.
I have the camera at a high angle, So I think a lot of people like assume I'm shorter than I am, and I'm built like more like I'm not like built tall or built. I'm built like very wide, like kind of like a dock worker. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, square built,
At
the
the
square head on top of it.
right at
Yeah.
the Million MAGA March, did you see any Antifa people there? Like, was the violence fighting
Oh,
amongst the people?
the Million MAGA March was super interesting for a few reasons. Where there were definitely Antifa people there, and I talk about this openly. Is that I saw, for example, there's this thing, and I think it's the stupidest thing on the planet. It's like hat snatching. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where
Yeah.
somebody has like one of these MAGA hats on, and they'll like sneak up behind him, grab the hat, and run away. I don't know what's achieved through that. I don't know if you think you're convincing anyone through. I have no clue what's achieved through that. It's not even like a particularly violent thing you just did, right? It's not like you've just intimidated this person. All that happened is they lost what amounts to probably a $15 hat, right?
Yeah.
I did see once, and this is something I really hated because it also landed right next to me. One of the people in Black Block took a firework, lit it, and then threw it into the open area of an outside restaurant. You know those areas that restaurants will have where part of it's like outside and they have outside tables.
Right.
They threw one of those into an outside restaurant. Later in the night, though, and this is something that I was maced by actually the Proud Boys. Um, I was part of like one of the later night protests. They saw us and they saw us a few times, they charged us a few times, but this time there was no cops between us and them, and they charged us. And I'm just kind of watching what's happening. They're like fighting and pushing back on people. I saw them one guy tried to come up and sucker punch this guy in the back of the head, and this guy just like kind of looks at me and just kind of sprays me like this with pepper spray. And I'm just standing there. In this footage online, you can just kind of see me standing there, just looking around, like what the fuck you more? Oh, excuse my French. Why are you morons doing this? And I get maced in the face. And then like later there was this girl who I saw like pulling up. I'm trying to remember if it was her arm or her leg. I think it was her arm. It's been a while since I've talked about this. She pulled up her arm and she had like a stab wound and on her arm, and I don't know if it was like from like a knife or just from like some like a screwdriver or what it was, but she had a stab wound in her arm, and that was something that really messed with me too because felt like a very unprovoked attack where there were certainly events of violence from like Antifa that night,
Right.
but when the Proud Boys charged the group wasn't doing anything. And you
Huh.
can see that clearly in the footage, which is publicly available. I've posted it a few times. It's been posted by other people. I've showed it on my YouTube channel, which gave me this one of the worst possible impressions of the Proud Boys.
Yeah, I
Uh,
bet.
yeah, I mean,
Um,
it definitely didn't win my support over that night.
yeah, that's wild. My experience and view of the Proud Boys and like the people who were called the alt-right back in the day was by and large they didn't really attack anybody unless they were attacked themselves. So, but
The whole
I wouldn't put it past.
we finish fights, not start them kind of mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like for example, the Charlottesville situation where they had the Unite the Right rally. They showed up, they had their right to protest, they had their permit and all that. And
Mhm.
then the cops didn't separate Antifa and Black Lives Matter from these people. And so when you don't separate opposing groups and some of them are violent, then you get to declare an unlawful assembly. And it seemed like a convenient setup by the authorities to do that type of thing.
I usually just believe it's incompetence.
Maybe.
I usually don't try to apply malice to what could easily be explained by incompetence, and never underestimate the government's ability to be incompetent. So I would say that from the instances I saw, I don't think it was like a thing where the cops were specifically like trying to make them fight or us fight. I think it was that um, due to the movement that was happening that night and protesters constantly kind of marching around, they didn't constantly shift from street to street, dividing each road. And so at one point, these two sides kind of just ended up going down the same road.
Right.
And when the Proud Boys saw people dressed in black, they just they just saw red and they charged because they probably heard something about other reports of the night. And so I assumed they were like, well, I heard an Antifa did this earlier in the night, so this is actually self-defense, and then they charge. But
Okay.
that's the problem with that is
Can't assume.
You can't assume that because then you start macing people who were just standing there.
That's honestly what kind of I think happened with Kyle Rittenhouse. The mob heard, oh, he killed a guy, we got to chase him, but they didn't really know what happened. It looks like it was self-defense against Rosenbaum, but those guys chased him and got themselves shot at, and some of them got hurt and killed. So
that's what's interesting about those situations, because I guess like in the amount of time that you would need to respond to, say, an active shooter, if you think there's like a shooter situation, you don't have the amount of time to gather like all the necessary facts to understand completely what's happening.
Right.
All you know is you heard some gunshots, somebody's dead, now a second person who tried to charge that first person's dead, and it's really confusing, and then you just see a bunch of videos posted online.
Yeah.
And that's why these situations happen. And it was true for the Kyle Rittenhouse one too. I always wait until I have all the information possible before I say anything. And I do that for police shootings. I did that for Kyle Rittenhouse. I'm doing it for the Alec Baldwin situation. I always wait until like usually a court date, unless it's like indisputable.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's what I think most people should do.
Yeah, I agree. That makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, I'm glad you were able to talk. I was going to ask you about your bad experience with the Proud Boys, because Lumi Rue, one of your guests on the first Hippy Dippy I was on, called them like white supremacists. And I was like, by and large, they've been decent, honorable men who just love America or love, the Western civilizations type thing and want to preserve the family and stuff.
It's guess for me, right? My experience with the Proud Boys is every time I saw the Proud Boys as a group, they were trying to enact some form of violence upon me that night. They tried to charge us one time, and the cops got in front of us. The second time, I got maced.
Were you dressed in black that day?
I had the Biden hoodie on, which I guess maybe if
close enough.
But I don't know. I don't see a lot of Antifa people in the Biden hoodies. They're usually not fans of Joe Biden,
right?
Because they see him as like a capitalist shill. So and I don't think I looked like this menacing Antifa man that night. I'm gonna be completely.
You're not
honest.
Small though. You're not small.
I'm not small, but you can't just profile people because they're a little larger.
Yeah, you have to be aggressing on them for them. Anyway, wow. You covered my slave. What were you about to say?
I guess for me, when it comes to the Proud Boys, they feel more like, in every engagement I've had with them, they feel more like a fight club than they do a protest movement.
Oh, okay.
And I remember I actually had a member of the Proud Boy on my show a few times. His name was Suspect Sushi. He's now, I believe, facing crimes from storming the Capitol. And I remember sending him the footage, like, hey, here's them clearly assaulting people. And he says, well, this is obviously bad. Like, this is very clear that this is bad. I have all the DMs to prove it if anybody wanted to question me on this. I think it's actually public now. And he goes to his friends and he's like, hey, look at this. Like, this is clearly like not a good thing that happened. And the way he explained it to me at the time was they basically all explained it away. Like, oh, those are just Antifas, or, they deserved it, or, these different things. Because, that was violence against the left or the supposed enemy, and therefore that violence was justified. And so for DC people and for people in my area, every time we've had the Proud Boys come in, they rough up a bunch of locals and then go back to their community, which is always what we've heard about Antifa, right? That Antifa are a bunch of outside white people who come into black communities, smash windows. And then I'm like, oh, really? That's a terrible impression. And then I see the Proud Boys come in and they just assault like local people who were just standing there a lot of times. And not to mention the what happened with that interaction with them in the black church and burning their property of their sign and stuff. That church is a church I passed many occasions when I was in DC. That also gave me a terrible impression of the organization.
I forgot all about that story. I'm not sure that I'm familiar with that story. I'll have to look it up sometime. You covered my slavery debate, and I wanted to talk about that with you. I appreciate you covering it. I talked with Infrared at the end of the Modern Day Debate communism discussion because I made the side comment that Democrats today are much worse than the slave owners, the Democrat slave owners of the past, because they support abortion, which is killing the babies in the womb. And that's like always a wrong. Whereas slavery, we were all taught, I think even you may have been taught, that there were good and bad slave owners. There were slave masters who treated their slaves generally well, and slave masters who may not have done that. And you would disagree with me, I think.
Yeah, I disagree with you, but I wanted to also say that in that discussion, I felt like you kind of gave him like a softball with like he basically just had to explain to you why slavery was bad, and it felt like he never really actually like thought to himself, why is it bad?
Right.
Like everybody like knows like slavery is wrong, right? Most like I feel like most people come to that conclusion, but I guess nobody really sits down and thinks about it. Like the same way if someone was to say, Dylan, why is rape wrong? I don't sit down and consider like the implicate because my conscience very clearly tells me that this thing is wrong.
Right.
But I felt like he could have easily appealed to some values that I think you have to explain it was wrong. For example, what I know that you're somebody who doesn't like thievery, doesn't like theft, stealing,
Right.
and you see that as an evil. And I would say that one of the main issues with slavery was the fact of the theft of labor that happened when it came to people, that you were stealing labor from them, and an ability for a man to profit from the fruit of their own labor and the sweat of their own brow, which I believe is every person's God-given right that was stolen from people from birth in many occasions. And so I felt like it was like a really easy task there to just like because I know you're against theft, and obviously that's theft occurring, the stealing of labor there.
You know, I and you said that you don't think that you could get me to agree on human rights, which I don't believe in the term human rights. I think that that's usually like a buzzword that's usually like globalist or communist or whatever. And so I think that you are right on that, but I would also like, I wouldn't want to be a slave because I would want to have my freedom to move about and have my own time a little bit, at least a little bit. And I wouldn't, nor would I really want to be a slave master because I don't even want pets. I don't want that responsibility. Not to be comparing the slaves to animals, but General Lee did call it a moral and political evil, according to Wikipedia. Like he wrote a letter to his wife or something like that, and it was just kind of a reality of life. Did you agree with his comparing slavery to like a rape or a like a child abuse situation? Or did you agree that there were some decent slave owners and they're honorable men?
I believe that there were, I think a better way to talk about it, if you wanted to talk about good and bad slave owners, would be there were people who were less abhorrent or less bad. And what I mean by that is if you are perpetuating or acting upon something that is negative, if you're stealing, right, which is what slavery is, you're stealing somebody's labor. You could be a worse thief or a better thief. Like you could steal a lot or steal and also like hurt somebody in stealing and murder somebody to steal like from a cash register. Or you could be a thief who like doesn't murder people and doesn't do those things. But at the end of the day, you're still stealing. You're still committing a moral wrong there. And that theft of labor is still a moral wrong. And so I don't think the way to put it would be a good or bad slave owner. It would be that some slave owners were worse than others.
I don't know if they saw it that way because it was like a reality of life. And they were purchased. They were like, they did lose whatever war or, get conquered or something. And so then like it was a reality of life to be owned and to own and all of this stuff. They were property. They were, and some of them were able to purchase their freedom and then become slave owners themselves and stuff like that.
Well, let me ask you a question then. There's two things I'd like to say. The first thing is just because something's a reality of the time does not make that morally objectionable as an institution. For example, I know you're very against abortion.
Right.
And there's a lot of people who are against abortion. And if let's say 100 years from now, you guys win that debate and you convince everybody, do you think a good excuse for people now would be, Oh, well, abortion was just a reality of the time. If you guys ended up being right on that.
Yes, in the sense that you had a, let me compare it to like abortion clinic bombers or people who like
Okay.
kill abortionists or whatever.
Hmm.
That is not justified at all. Just like I say that I call him a terrorist. You didn't think that he's a terrorist. John Brown,
Hmm.
I thought that he committed terrorist attacks and murders in the name of freeing the slaves or something, right?
Yeah.
And I think that you said something like you felt that John Brown didn't do enough to
Yeah.
fight against the slavery. But since it was like a reality of the time, everybody thinks that abortion is fine. And so you can't just commit an act of war to stop the genocide because you have to change people's hearts.
Our nation though was built upon something like that. For example, the king and the monarchy was just the reality of the time, even though monarchies and the idea that these single men can claim that God has hand chosen them to do this and do that, and that you don't need representation or democracy, that is an extremely immoral system in my values. And we violently fought against that, even though it was just the reality of the time. And so I do believe that you can, in certain circumstances, uh, use tactics which many people would say what tactics that we used during the Revolutionary War were similar to even John Brown's tactics. We did not treat a lot of the pro-British people very well. We even tarred and feathered many of them,
Yeah.
and were very negative. But there's another point I wanted to make about well, they were conquered in wars and stuff like that. Many people were not gotten through those processes, even though I would still say that was immoral. Let's say somebody's born into it. This would happen many times where somebody was born while their mother was enslaved, and then their child, their offspring, would then be sold off. That is a person who had zero determination. Not even to say that the mother
Right.
did, but that's somebody even outside of the circumstances that you've just proposed. And so even though this was somebody who was born into having stuff stolen from them, they had their family stolen from them. I know you're somebody who's extremely pro family, and they get removed from many times their mother and their father and their sisters and their brothers, and are separated from that. And the emotional trauma that is done onto them by people who separate the families is also something that was extremely abhorrent. It was anti family in many instances.
I heard that they a lot of times kept the families together because they worked better as families, but I have heard that they were separated sometimes as well. I think that it's more damaging when the family members themselves, such as today, where are just so immoral that they break apart on their own, or they never form in the first place on their own. I think it's more damaging to a child to have an evil mother than to have the mother taken from them by some other outside force. The child will understand the mother was taken from them. It's not the mother's fault. But if the mother's being evil toward the child, or the mother's forcing the father away because of situations like that's happening today, and this type of situation is utterly not talked about. You know what I mean? The broken family situation. There is a hesitance to criticize black single mothers because you're racist and sexist and all that stuff. When in reality, like, that is a great evil in the world today that I think is a worse trauma than what the little slave boys who were separated from their families went through.
So you think that single motherhood is a greater trauma than slavery?
Yeah, because it's through the fault of the people themselves rather than through no fault of their own.
So I would say that the trauma and what would be worse for the child, I would say I would have to most certainly lean is towards the slavery for a few reasons. The first reason is that in many of times they are separated from their family, period, and so they have no mother, they have no father, they have no anyone. All they have is the person who has dominion over them, and is stealing their labor since birth.
Hmm.
That they've never even tasted freedom, or the ability to sweat from their own brow and profit from it, but also they've never tasted freedom of movement. And in many of these instances, they've never tasted, say, things like freedom of speech. I mean, it's not like they can like walk up to the person who is enslaving them and be like, I have a few labor complaints that I want to bring up quick, and I want to, I'm thinking of unionizing. Actually, I don't think that's something they were able to do. And so um, even under the worst circumstances that you could possibly imagine when it comes to a mother or a single mother, things like they were not born restricted when it comes to freedom of movement, or if they were, when they hit 18, there's nothing legally binding them there. But in slavery, even adulthood does not escape them. They cannot escape
Right.
the control of the person who has dominion over them. And once they hit 18, or a lot of times before 18, they could sweat from their own brow. This child, maybe the mom steals from them, maybe, but they could hide the money. Or once they get 18, maybe they could flee in some way. That's not possible when it comes to enslavement, unless you join something like the Underground Railroad or find some way to earn your freedom. Earn being like saying like you have to earn. I don't think anyone should morally have to earn it, but let's say you achieve it in some way. Not to put like a moral designation on the word earn. And so I find the idea that single motherhood is worse than slavery. I disagree with that entirely.
But have you seen like the crime and the degeneracy and the misery that people and the hatred that is so out of control today? I don't know if that hatred and murder and rampant rape and criminality and just spiritual deadness. Spiritual evil, I think, is worse than physical evil.
So the thing that gets me, I'm somebody who had to deal with the fact that my parents were not completely,
Right.
present, and I felt much of the pain that came with that, of not being able to have that what you would say traditional family style. Thankfully, I had a mother and a father figure in my grandparents who raised me very old fashioned. My grandfather was a Vietnam vet who grew up castrating pigs on a farm.
Nice.
And a very old fashioned man, to say the least. And a machinist. He worked on machines for the federal government. The Bureau of Engraving and Printing. He would, the machines that print the money.
Yeah.
He made those machines. So if you want to thank anyone for inflation, you can thank my grandfather. But and my grandmother was a cook for the federal government as well. And there is no point during that, though, where when I hit 18, I could have left. For example, there was a situation where I had to leave a family home of mine. Like, I was living with family members due to a problem I had there, a physical problem, and I don't want to get too in detail, but where a family member tried to strangle me to death. Very, very terrible situation. Now, let's say that I was enslaved there. I couldn't legally leave or call the police and be escorted off the property and now move in and live by myself like I'm doing now. I couldn't do that, right?
Right.
But now since that isn't a thing, I can do that. And so there's more options available to people to escape suffering when you're not enslaved or bound to somebody who owns you.
I get that. Now, there were some laws governing the slave masters. For example, you did say that it was against the laws in some areas to even teach the slaves to read. So the slave masters couldn't just do anything with the slaves.
Of course. Well, I would say that it depends upon how willing the local jurisdiction is willing to enforce the laws.
Right.
If a jaywalking law is on paper, but then nobody enforces it, well, then it's nothing but paperwork. But it is true that there were certain laws governing them. But I would say that it's trying to regulate an evil institution in that way. You can try to limit the evils, but it's better to strike at the core and get rid of that evil like we did in the United States. Because it's like, should we remove 10% of the tumor? Should we remove 20% of the tumor? No, you should remove the entirety of the tumor.
I'm not sure that I've heard that slavery was on its way out anyway. And
why do you think that was?
I don't know why. I've just heard that. Is that true?
I would say that it's difficult to say exactly where slavery would have headed if there was no civil war. Let's say we avoided that completely and we continued, because we can see the violence was escalating with bleeding Kansas and the fight over every state, whether it was going to be a free state or a slave state. but the economy was drastically changing to a point where it was not to the same economic benefit. There was still an economic benefit to an old Southern aristocracy, but it wasn't to the same economic benefit to the nation as a whole, and the nation didn't wouldn't profit as much as it would have before. And so when you combine that with the international kind of negative view that came with this, and on top of it, that there was such a strong abolitionist movement that was building, and how much tension it created in the nation, I do feel like eventually it had to go one way or the other. But I'm happy it went sooner rather than later. Obviously, if the Civil War could have been avoided and no one could have died, I would have preferred that.
Right.
But it seemed that the people who seceded were very determined to protect their interests when it came to preserving the institution of slavery.
Do you agree there were very fine people on both sides?
Of the Civil War,
Yeah.
I believe you could probably find individual people in very certain circumstances. But ultimately, if you pick up the flag of a treasonous rebellion, which is
Treasonous?
what
Wait.
yeah, treasonous, a treasonous rebellion of the Confederacy, to fight essentially, as was stated by Jefferson Davis and multiple Confederate politicians as they seceded, and was shown clearly on their memorabilia when you talk about the white man's battle flag and all this other stuff. It's very clear that they were fighting this war in large part, if not the majority part, to preserve an evil institution. And they were willing to betray the United States in order to do that.
But
And
they wanted to
that
secede. They didn't want to betray the United States. They wanted to secede.
did they want? I would call that still a form of treason. For example, let's
But
say
that's
that I
a
did.
constitutional, right?
Let me ask you a question.
All right.
Let's say tomorrow I'm like, I'm going to create the communist state of Maryland. And so Maryland's voting to become communist and we're seceding. Would you call that a form of treason if we started raising up an army and firing upon government outposts, which is what the Confederacy did?
But wasn't the war started? We don't even know who fired the first shot.
I think it's largely, I'm pretty sure it was, I'm trying to remember if it was Fort Sumter. Or what exactly the name was, but I'm pretty sure the Confederacy fired the first shot because they wanted to take a government post of some sort.
I don't know. I've always heard it was the War of Northern Aggression because Lincoln did not want it to be, he wanted the country to be one rather than two countries.
I guess you could call it the War of Northern Aggression. I would call it the War of Southern Betrayal.
All right. I got to read some super chats that many of which are addressed to you before we finish up here. Asmodor over on Odyssey says regarding the what you said, you compared the attack on slavery to like the attack on the Brits, the redcoats. Asmodor says this is an ignorant and dishonest argument. Great Britain was a constitutional monarchy. The British people had access to democratic institutions. The American colonists revolted because they were being denied their rights as Englishmen.
Did the slaves have their right to vote?
Not constitutionally, no. Only the white landowners.
So if I don't understand how that's hypocritical then, because my thing is I believe that we had a right to rebel because we were not being given no taxation without representation. And when you talk about the people who were enslaved, they were people who were not allowed to participate in the system of governance, even though their census data was still used in order to increase the power of Southern aristocrats. I believe that they should be allowed. I know it's a controversial issue, but I believe black people should be able to vote.
All right. I don't think that most of them should.
What was that?
I said I don't think that most of them should.
Why is that?
Because they vote for the destruction of themselves and the whole rest of the country.
I would say that black people are voting in their self-interests and that they have a right to vote. And if you think they're voting for their self-destruction, that's still their right to vote for their self-destruction. Just like it would be my right to say, I think you're voting for your own self-destruction by voting for Republicans. Of course you see it that way. But do you think they see it that way?
they don't see it all. They don't know what's good for them. And I don't think it is a right to vote. I think that it's way too widespread for any idiot to vote. I think I agree with Jesse Lee that the landowners should vote. Men,
Right.
you know.
You know what? I have a test. I think the first thing is if you call it the War of Northern Aggression, you don't get the vote.
I got to keep reading these super chats.
Okay.
Your girlfriend. Oh, wait. Let me just start kind of more from the beginning. The guest says. Oh, I don't know. Asmodor says with a super chat. The guest says. I don't know if this is true. That he has blank. I'm blanking it. It's not even necessarily a bad word. With men. So the F slur is accurate and appropriate, he says.
The F slur is meant to demean somebody who is part of that community, right? It's not appropriate to do that. It would be like if I started throwing insults at, like, let's say I walked up to Hake and I started saying you're something based upon your right. Like, let's say I started calling you like, we're on YouTube, right? I'm not streaming on Twitch.
Yeah, right.
Okay, let's say I started calling like you're a cracker or something like that. Like you're using derogatory insults based upon immutable characteristics. I don't think you should be able to do that, and I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's well, you should legally be allowed to do that. I don't think it's appropriate.
All right. I don't think that it's immutable is not a proper word for that, because the mayor of New York, former mayor, I guess, was married to a lesbian, and now she's straight. So it's not totally immutable.
Well, I mean, of course, I would say that there are a lot of possibilities that lead to people doing it. For example, you know who Milo Yiannopoulos is? By
Right.
chance?
Yeah.
Milo Yiannopoulos is somebody, and I feel like anybody with two pennies to rub together could figure out that Milo Yiannopoulos did not have a deep change of heart here, and is now the straightest man to ever straight. I think they could tell with any level of conception of the situation that this is a man who fell on economic hardship and is now trying to find a way to get out of that economic hardship. And I don't believe he's found some way away from homosexuality. And I found no research showing that you can de-gay yourself. It is possible that somebody could be bisexual, and so they thought they were gay, and then later they're like, actually, I do have attraction for women, and that's a way out of for them. But other than that, if you are a homosexual, you can't de-gay yourself. There's been no evidence shown that you could do that. If you could, then it would be something that a lot more people would gain access to around the world, because that could mean they could avoid persecution.
All right. I think it's probably rare for people to change, period. Your girlfriend with a super chat says, lefties will often sarcastically ask, when did Marx say that? Whenever Hake suspects communist motives from our government. As far as I'm aware, Marx hasn't himself been in charge of any communist form of government in his lifetime. Hake refers to communism in practice and not Marx's idealistic concept of it. I don't know if that's addressed to you specifically.
I think it might have to do within the factor into Jesse Lee Peterson interview. Jesse Lee Peterson said things like Social Security were communist.
Oh, yeah.
And I said it wasn't, because it has nothing to do with owning the means of production. And I stand by that, because governments throughout American history and state governments and governments, federal governments around the world, governments you could never say were communist. Let's say, like Bismarck is not a man you could say is a communist, okay? This is a very old style European man who had a lot of power in Germany, but even he favored certain programs in order to help the people economically. But that didn't make him a communist or make that a communist program when it came to direct payments to anyone or certain food programs. I think communism is a little bit more than the government gave people money.
All right. Taking care of business over on Odyssey, odyssee.com/@the-Hake Report says, Hake, ask him why he has a Korean anime doll in his background. Is he a furry?
You mean that thing right there?
Yes.
There is a Twitch streamer by the name of Jay Schlatt. I think you'd actually maybe agree with much of his politics, Hake. He's very funny. He reminds me a lot of Norm Macdonald, and I'm a huge fan of Norm Macdonald.
Nice.
Are you a fan of Norm Macdonald?
I wasn't really that familiar with him until after he died, and then I saw some of these highlights of his stuff, and I'm like, oh, he's cool. What a shame.
He's a very funny man, and Jay Schlatt is a very similar in his comedy. I actually got Norm Macdonald's book, and I do recommend it. It's Norm Macdonald's Not an Autobiography. It's a decent read, and I recommend it to anybody
And he was a
who has
Christian
time on
too.
their hands. Yes, and he was center right, as far as I'm familiar. Yeah.
Asador with another super chat. The 1790 Immigration Act. Only free white persons of good character can be citizens. The guest engages in homosexual acts, thus, allegedly, but thus based on character, according to our founding fathers, the guest would not qualify for USA citizenship.
So I would say that it's not allegedly, but it's confirmed. Sorry, my citizenship has been revoked. Very sad to say. I'll go on the run from ICE very shortly. But besides that, I would say that the founding fathers left the system to reform the system and to repeal laws and replace laws and reform the Constitution. And I do not think there is any standing legal practice showing that homosexuals can have their citizenship revoked because it's not of good standing character. Because if we're going that way, I would say anybody who believes that the South had the right to secede is of not good standing character and should have their citizenship revoked. We could play that game all day.
But that's part of the Constitution. Isn't the secession part of the Constitution?
Well, the question is of good standing character. Even if it was constitutional, that doesn't mean it's of good standing character to secede so you could steal people's labor.
Whatever. Your girlfriend with another super chat. Even Marx, and even she's going on about the Marxism and communism. Even Marx's interpretation of ideal communism is flawed. Governments often exploit its tenets for that very reason. It never is nor will be for the benefit of the majority of its subjects.
I'm not a communist, so I won't defend communism.
All right. I was defending yesterday, one more super chat since I'm on the super chats. Yesterday I was defending the innocence of the late, great Michael Jackson, who was innocent unless proven guilty, right? Accused of stuff towards children. Hydro over there on streamlabs.com/the Hake Report is addressing a caller that I had yesterday who was saying, oh, he's most likely a pedophile.
Yeah, I think that stuff can be strange. I don't know enough about the case to really say. But I actually made a whole video on my channel. It's called Pedophiles Can't Stop Bragging. It's one of my favorite videos. And it goes in detail about how a lot of pedophiles openly brag about being pedophiles. Like R. Kelly, would write into his music, would specifically, like, for example, one of his songs, he said, in the mall, I'm on the prowl like a dog. And that is widely reported where he would actually go search for his victims. Or you could, like the many times he talked about, like, age is just a number. I mean, that's a little on the nose, don't you think? Or Ted Nugent, who Ted Nugent, famously, who said that he adopted a girl before marrying a girl who was underage. Of course, wrote the song Jailbait, and then the next song on the album was I'm a Predator. So, I mean, that's a little on the nose, too.
Wow, but those two men, they are like they're like musical stars, and they have women. Many of them like did not have their fathers, so they and many young ladies who don't have their fathers, they go through puberty early, and so they look older than they are. I don't know that these men were going after children so much as underage young ladies. Which
for R. Kelly's case, you're talking about somebody, I think Aisha, who was 12 or 13. I do not think under any circumstances a 30-year-old man should be engaged with a minor who is 12 or 13 under any circumstances.
Neither do I, but I'm just saying that these people were like Milo. He clarified about pederasty versus pedophilia. These people were I don't know. I
I
wouldn't
know.
want to
I
speculate about, especially Ted Nugent. He hasn't been.
Ted Nugent admitted to it though. That's why I believe him, because I'm believing his own words. I find
I've
him to
never
be an
heard.
honest man. And he's talked about this openly in the documentary, that he got the parents' permission to date the minor, therefore he thought it was justifiable. I don't think it's justifiable for grown men to be dating minors.
Well, isn't the, and I'm not for this, but isn't like the age of consent in Mexico like, I don't even want to say what the number is. I thought that the age of
Um,
consent in Mexico, as far as having sex.
was this in Mexico?
No, I'm just saying that different cultures and different times, people have
Well,
totally different.
I
People
agree
are
with the
immature at a
American
very old age
culture.
now.
I guess I'm a rah-rah, I love America, and I agree with the American cultural standard of 18, and I don't even want to entertain any ideas of lowering the age of consent. I don't think you
So
would
do
either,
I.
Hake, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. But hasn't it been true that the delaying of maturity of us, you're pretty mature for a 20-year-old, but by
Yeah.
the old standards, the old school American standards, you might not be so mature for a 20-year-old. So I think that we have a problem of keeping people infantile in their minds and spirit until after, like, the women are almost dried up and not even able to have babies. What a
Well,
scam, you know?
in the Jailbait song, believe he specifically, I would have to look up the lyrics, but I think he says like 16 was like she was only 16. The song is about a
Uh-huh.
16-year-old, and I think Ted Nugent was 30 something. So let's say you made, and there are certain laws around this. Romeo and Juliet laws by chance?
No.
Romeo and Juliet laws. Let's say I remember I was 18 and I was dating this girl who was 17, right? Because we were both in the same class
Right.
in high school. We were both in the 12th grade. We were only separated by 12, I think by 2 months in like age difference, right?
Right.
So that's not anything that anybody would really have an objection with. We're in the same class, we're only 2 months apart, and what Romeo and Juliet laws do is protect people who are like that. So basically, it protects like 18-year-olds who date 17-year-olds
Right.
and
Okay.
19-year-olds who date 17-year-olds. That type of stuff is different. But Ted Nugent was not like that. Ted Nugent had a huge maturity gap with the 16-year-old he sung about, or the minor he was with. When I believe he was in his 30s or something when he released Jailbait. Even if he was something like 25, that would be objectionable, because I do believe that once you're like 16, 17, you can start dating and stuff like that, but you should be dating people in around your age group,
Right.
not people who are in their 30s.
Okay. So what Hydro recommended for my caller who was making the accusations against Michael Jackson, he says, your caller should watch a video called Michael Jackson Rebutta by Rageaholic that explains with facts why Michael Jackson is innocent. I don't know. One last.
I don't
Go
know
ahead.
anything about Michael Jackson. It's not really my musical taste or
Really?
my nah. I'm not a. I know he's the king of pop, but just I don't know, man. It's just not my type of music.
Last super chat before we wrap up, and you can promote what you got going. As Medora with the super chat states, the Declaration of Independence states that governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. It is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government. The guest is trying to argue that man has no self-determination. I think that's a reference to you arguing against the South seceding to preserve slavery.
Yes, I understand what they're saying, but there's one problem there. The consent of the governed. I do not believe those who were enslaved were consenting to being enslaved. And so that picture doesn't include those in the South who were enslaved.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on, man. It's been enjoyable. I'm sorry I wasn't able to read more of the live chat over there in the snake pit, but
It's okay.
yeah.
We resolved a lot of big issues today. In the year 2022, we've settled that slavery is bad. Black people probably have the right to vote. I think you're maybe a little shaky on that one. Maybe I'll get you next time, and that and that the Confederacy shouldn't have seceded. I would think you believe that, or do you not believe
You
that?
know what? I am not sure on that because I wasn't really around at that time, so and I have not read a lot about it, but they had some legitimate complaints, I think. And to this day, they have some really legitimate complaints that the federal government is kind of imposing on the people, and the federal police are the least trustworthy of all police. So
To
there's
this day.
I
so
guess I just believe those impositions when it comes to things like. By the way, Abraham Lincoln offered to the people who were rebelling, like, hey, you can even preserve your slavery for now, like everything's chill, and they rejected it because they were so scared because of this Republican president
yeah.
that he would get rid of slavery. I heard that you were questioning whether you liked Abraham Lincoln or not at one point.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know.
Mm.
I've heard stuff that he was like he wrote a letter or received a letter from Karl Marx, who was kind of cheerleading the Civil War. Unsurprising for a communist to support mass death, but
Well,
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't think he was cheering it on because people were dying. I think
Not
he was cheering
because,
it
yeah,
on
he was
because he wanted
justifying it.
slavery to be
Right.
gone.
Yeah.
I do believe that if somebody wanted to join the Union Army to fight against slavery, that was a moral cause, and probably one of the best reasons you could join any war effort would to be to abolish that theft of labor and to stop that evil from continuing.
All right. Well, Dylan Burns TV, guys. Dylan Burns TV on Twitch and YouTube. What else do you want to promote or say?
Well, I guess you can get all your best anti-slavery takes at Dylan Burns TV on YouTube. You can also find me on Twitter at DylanBurns7076. You spell my name DylanBurnsTV. I'd appreciate any of you guys checking out my stuff, and you all have an amazing day.
Oh, thank you, sir. Can I read these last few super chats? Well, I
Sure,
promise,
if you want to.
I
Why
promise,
not?
but we'll finish before 10:20. Azador states the legal age of consent in Michigan, Nugent's home state, is 16. Interesting. Azador states slaves aren't citizens, so their consent is irrelevant. Nice. And he says the South rejected Lincoln's offer because slavery was not a central issue of secession, he states.
So I guess I would say Michigan should raise the age of consent. I think it also had to do with the fact that Nugent said that he adopted the girl, which also feels a little strange to adopt and date someone at the same time. I'd have to go back and fact check if that to be sure. So I'll leave a question mark over that one. Much like you left a question mark over Mr. Lincoln. When it comes to the idea that they aren't citizens, I guess my contention would be I believe they should be, and them being black or brought over enslaved or born from enslaved people is not proper justification to deny them certain inalienable rights. And so I believe that they deserved to be citizens. And what was the last one?
They rejected Lincoln's offer because slavery was not the central issue of secession.
I believe slavery was the central issue of secession. I trust the Confederates who said it was, the Confederate leadership who claimed it was. Multiple of the seceding states leaders said that the issue here is this, and they would say multiple times the issue here is slavery. That is why we are seceding.
And lastly, your girlfriend states, not necessarily yours.
Every time you say that, I'm like, are you about to ask me? You keep throwing me off.
I brought up communism, she states, because most of the Hippy Dippy panel thought Hake was being extreme when it came to his claim of infrastructure being a communist buzzword. Many people don't believe that they're supporting communism, and it's often because those proposing it will use coded language like infrastructure.
So you could say, I think if I wanted to be as charitable as possible to Hake, because I know Hake loves the left and the left loves Hake. If I wanted to be as charitable as possible, I would say that what Hake was trying to get at, and tell me if I'm right or wrong here, is that we used the word infrastructure, but then there was a bunch of stuff in the legislation that didn't really have to do with roads or bridges or what we would traditionally consider infrastructure. And so it was a Trojan horse of sorts trying to sneak in other democratic policies. I assume that's what you were trying to get at
It's
with it
also
was a buzzword.
it is that, but it's also a centralization of control and meddling, because really, like, the local people should be the ones in charge of funding these things for the most part. I mean, there is a little
Hmm.
bit of interest from the bigger community of states and like whatever to go and, hey, let's make a deal, help me out, build this thing because a lot of your residents are going to want to come through, stuff like that.
Hmm.
But the centralization of like education and all of this stuff and even transportation is kind of like this a central tenet of communism, central control rather than local control.
I would say that the centralization of power doesn't necessarily make you a communist, and neither does a federal infrastructure package. Dwight D. Eisenhower was somebody who was a fervent anti-communist, and if he heard the word communist, you'd see him go for his pistol. The man did not like communism, yet he paved thousands upon thousands of miles with federal funds of roads across this country. And I don't think that was a communist program. And just because something is from a central authority doesn't make it communist either. The king, the monarchy of Great Britain, wasn't a communist government. Neither would, say, the Saudi Arabian government of, not to compare these things like they're the same, of course, the American government and the Saudi or the British monarchy. But these are centralized control. This is central control. But they're anything but communist. Communists hate monarchies. Communists hate people who claim that God has given them a power. So yeah, I would say that just because something has to do with centralized federal control does not make it communist.
Communists are haters for sure. I appreciate it, Dylan. It's great to hear from you, man. Dylan Burns TV, Dylan Burns 1776 on Twitter. Thanks, man.
Nice to finally come on your show. I'm happy to come on and invite me on again. I'd love to come on again sometime, and you will have a blessed week. Okay.
You as well. And maybe next time we can take some calls. Take care, man.
Wonderful. Take care.
All right.